this is a very low-tech presentation. I have some notes.
Talk louder.
I will speak louder. Меня зовут Нина Chordas, я происхожу из русской семьи. Я говорю по-русски. Русский был мой первый язык, очень дорогой мне язык. My name is Nina Chordas. I come from a Russian-speaking family, and Russian was my first language. It's a language that's very dear to me, and which I have revitalized for myself in the last few years by reading more, translating, speaking with other people. This was a wonderful opportunity for me to look into how people acquire a second language or relearn a second language, because what's going on here with the language revitalization is so exciting. And so I just want to share some of the things that I learned in looking into this question. So what I did was I looked up second language acquisition in the library. There are a lot of sources popped up, and I teach English at UAS, and I like books, so I went and found the book versions of everything, so you can get it electronically. One of the books that was very interesting is called Reversing Language Shift, and it's by Joshua A. Fishman, and he says the destruction of a language is the destruction of a rooted identity, which we know from the effects that it has. Language shift can't be reversed or accomplished without the involvement of the family and the community as a whole, because it doesn't happen in isolation. And in and of itself, he says it's kind of a good problem because it involves the potential contribution of the whole community in revitalizing it. And when the whole community becomes involved, then you get the cultural aspects that go with the language. So Fishman, he has a model of how languages diminish and become less and less spoken, all the factors that kind of go into that. If you read it from top to bottom, you can see how a language begins to disappear. If you read it from bottom to top, you can see how the language begins to come back and become revitalized. And it was interesting to me because the stages that are exemplified in this chart are exactly the kinds of things that are happening here right now in Southeast Alaska. Reconstructing the language, teaching it to the youth and the elders, speaking it again or coming in and helping to teach it. And also the cultural interaction with community-based. So the old elders come in and teach the cultural aspects as well as the language itself. I was particularly kind of excited by a book called A Philosophy of Second Language Acquisition by Mauricio Johnson. Came out in 2004. And she has what she calls a dialogical approach, which takes into consideration the dynamic role of social contexts, individuality, intentionality, etc. A lot of cognitive models that show how people learn language kind of show it going from theoreticians and researchers, and then it goes down to the teachers and the testers, and from there it goes to the learners. Or you could say that you have input, and then your learner gets your input and processes it, internalizes it, and then is able to reproduce that language. But in the dialogical framework, this assumes the existence of multiple realities that are interpreted differently by different individuals in different language contexts. So it's not like there's something already inside you that's just waiting to be activated. You are learning your language from your surroundings and your social interactions. She cites a Russian language theorist. I think in English he's pronounced Vygotsky, and in Russian it's Vygotsky, but I'm going to try to say him in English. He has a sociocultural theory of learning language, because it's a dialectic between the inter and intrapsychological. So you're interacting with other people, and you're also interacting within yourself, in your own mind, as you learn a language. So for Vygotsky, the higher mental functions, such as rational thought and learning, originate in social activity. Any function of a child's cultural development appears twice, or on two planes. First, it appears on the social plane, and then the child internalizes it and reproduces it within him or herself. And for Vygotsky, the higher mental functions do not originate in biology or anything like that, but from the social interaction. So the child's unfolding development is not shaped by a programmed cognitive code, but by their community and what they're exposed to as they grow up. This was, I thought, was rather exciting. I found this a very interesting model because the social interaction constitutes the prerequisite for the emergence of higher forms of consciousness. So our minds are really shaped by our surroundings and our interactions with them. We could not function without the community that we grow up in and learn from. Johnson, the author of this book, also cites a Russian literary critic and language theorist named Mikhail Bakhtin, who viewed language not as an abstract system of linguistic forms, but as speech. So it's your actual speech that you utter that is the basic form of the language and makes the basic unit of language is the speech utterance. And he also Bakhtin talks about speech genres, that in different contexts with different speakers, there are different genres of speech. For example, you can think of a college classroom where you have, maybe if you're taking an English course, you're talking about literary theory. If you're taking a math course, you have math concepts. They're all different kinds of languages that you have to learn as you are in that context. Native oratory is a context that can be learned. People learn how to speak appropriately in certain settings. So these are very specific contexts, and they're used by specific speakers in different situations. So in her book, Johnson is talking about the application of this sociocultural theory to second language acquisition. And she talks about it as a collectively constructed support system that linguists, I think, call scaffolding, where you have a speaker who's kind of more advanced, helps speakers who are learning to acquire the language. But as we heard, I think, from what Michelle was saying as well, there was a study done in 1998 by Richard Donato that found out that second language learners themselves can be considered good sources for language acquisition. So knowledge can be constructed between learners, which Michelle was talking about, the women who were living in the house that were kind of in the same stage of acquiring a language, and they assisted each other with help from elders coming in, but they were able to help each other learn the language. And this can happen here. I think this is very promising because somebody who knows the language can come in and help, but people who are learning can also exchange information that helps them acquire the knowledge. Vygotsky says that knowledge is socially and dialogically derived. What we know comes to us from our interactions, our speech with other members of our community. So in this sense, the theories of these two Russians, Vygotsky and Bakhtin, provide a bridge between the learner's external and internal realities, and it's kind of a holistic perspective on how the social and the mental can merge together. It's a dialectical relationship, and when you have something that's dialectical, so you have the social and you have the mental, and in a dialectical process they affect each other, so they're constantly changing each other. It's a dynamic process. And that is how we acquire languages and our higher cognitive abilities. So the learner's social environment is regarded not only as the source of the learner's language, but also the source of the learner's cognitive growth. Because in sociocultural theory, cognition and language are closely intertwined and one does not precede the other. It happens simultaneously. So this model also erases the distinction between language competence and language performance. So you kind of feel like, I can't speak very well. I haven't learned everything I need to know. But in this model, in the process of speaking is how you come to know the language. So it's encouraging. I thought it was kind of encouraging. So in other words, social contexts create the language, and the language creates the social context. And they're constantly affecting each other in a specific culture. And that's why languages are so embedded in the cultures and vice versa. So these contexts are not universal. It's not like language is the same everywhere. No, it is very specific to it's highly localized, and therefore language ability is also locally bound. It reflects all the characteristics of a well-defined sociocultural and institutional context. And the second, language ability is not situated in the learner's mind, but in the multitude of sociocultural and institutional settings in a variety of discursive practices. So part of the process of somebody acquiring a second language or remembering a language maybe they once knew and forgot is incorporating new voices that are, so this of the target language. So you're looking at the sociocultural and institutional settings of the target language, and these need to be absorbed and appropriated by second language learners to help them become active participants in their target language culture. And as we appropriate these voices, this needs to take place in real life situations that are now filled with different people, different voices, and in a way they need to be reappropriated by the second language learner. For example, there are settings such as the post office or the bank or a classroom that would be experienced differently by different language speakers. The language you speak is going to shape how you interact in that setting and how you perceive that setting. So in a way, this is what Johnson refers to as the co-construction and co-creation of the self with second language learning. And understanding the process of appropriation of these new voices depends partly on the involvement of native speakers, people who already do know the language and the social context and are able to come in and help the new learners to acquire these. So a summary of this sort of new dialogical model of second language acquisition that's based on Vygotsky's sociocultural theory and Bakhtin's heteroglossia. I'm just going to sum up some of its points. So one, language learning is not universal or linear, but it's local and it's dialectical. It happens within the community setting as the speaker interacts with community members in different situations. Language performance, number two, and language competence cannot be separated because they're dialectically related, and the more you use the language, of course, the better you get. But you get better because you're using it, so it's kind of a process, a very dynamic process. Number three, language is not viewed as a linguistic code, but a speech embedded in a variety of sociocultural contexts. Four, the learner is not viewed as a limited processor unable to attend to both the form and meaning at once. A lot of times when you're formally learning a language, you're given a lot of rules, right? You have to learn these rules and then fill those rules up with words, and then you have to learn how to spit those words out in the right order, in the right context. But in this model, they kind of happen at the same time, because as you're practicing the language in all your sociocultural contexts. Okay, so number five, to acquire the target language, is to require discursive practices or speech genres. So you're acquiring the kinds of genres characteristic of a given sociocultural and institutional setting. So in other words, your target language occurs in specific settings, and so you're acquiring the vocabularies and what you need in order to function in those settings. Sixth, the discursive practices typical of a given sociocultural setting are not limited to verbal signs, but also include nonverbal signs such as gestures, facial expressions, and also other semiotic signs such as graphs and maps, art, work. You learn to interpret artwork according to the context that it occurs in and the language that goes with it. 7, cognitive and second language development is not separate in this model, but it's dialectical and is each transforms the other. So language development and everything you need in your mind to acquire and process that language happen at the same time in this model. You don't have to wait to get all the rules right before you can use the language. 8, interaction between old voices and new voices is essential, and for the learner's language and cognitive development. So it's important to realize that in any given setting, you may have processed it through one language, and now you're processing it through another language, and it'll be different. And it'll be different according to the perceptions that are embedded in that very language. 9, the development of the second language ability is viewed as a process of becoming an active participant in the target language. And so the goal is to get these second language learners participating in the culture and the language that they're trying to learn. And it's very important for native speakers who are already proficient in that language and fluent to assist the learners in entering that language community. So I thought that this was a very exciting model. It seemed to reflect a lot of what's happening here with language revitalization, and it's been an honor for me to actually witness what's going on here and to learn about some of these processes and maybe how they work, and in this local revitalization effort that's going on here that I believe is going to be successful. And thank you very much for the